Hi, everyone. I am
Hi.
Anders, and I welcome you to this discussion, how to get your strategy game published. I'm joined by these three gentlemen here, representing other companies focusing on strategy game publishing. And so maybe first we go around the table and just tell everyone who we are. And so if I'm just going kind of counterclockwise, I actually have Sebastian on the 12 position from my side. So maybe you want to start.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Sebastian Forsström, and I am the head of Paradox Arc, which is Paradox Interactive's new sublabel for publishing games. That's who I am.
And I'm Tim Bender. I'm the CEO of Hooded Horse, a strategy game indie publisher.
And I'm Johan from Goblin Studio. We are indie publisher specialized in strategy and simulation games.
And I am Anders, as I said. I'm the CEO of Firesquid, and Firesquid is actually the publishing arm of Lightbulb Crew, which is a video game developer. And our last game came out back in 2020 called Other Side, who happens to be actually part of this event as well, as we released the DLC recently. And so we are actually, at Firesquid, we're focusing on strategy games fairly broadly. And so we actually announced one game this week called USC Counterforce, which is kind of a really cool old school space squad tactics game. But anyways, I was going to talk, but we have a bunch of stuff to talk about. And the idea here is that we want to get people to understand a little bit about what publishing is, how it works, and what type of games, we as different companies would be interested in publishing, etc. And so I was going to start maybe with just very simply talking very little bit about what publishing is. And so we simplify it. You have the game developer is the one who actually develops the game, and then the publisher kind of does all the rest. So it could be marketing, financing, distribution, getting it on Steam or on video consoles, etc. But in reality, exactly who does what about this kind of varies from situation to situation and publisher to publisher. Some publishers will do all of the supporting things, and in many situations you can split up that responsibility between you. And then in the end, kind of the publisher and the developer then share the revenues from the game, often depending on how much each one has invested, either in like time or just pure cash. And so one of the things that could be interesting to talk about is kind of what different, that was kind of the basics, but what different publishing contracts are there, and kind of what have you had experience with? And what kind of contracts do you do actually as a publisher? So I don't know who want to start to talk about that. It's kind of...
Yeah. You want to go, Tim?
Sure. So I mean, I think Anders introduced publishing well, and of course, there's we could talk about what publishing is. We could also talk about popular understandings of publishing. Of course, not always does publishers have the best reputation, and in fact, probably most gamers have a negative impression of at least some, and perhaps the entire idea of it. But I think that all of us here at this table do try to do publishing the way it should be done. That is, to be a good partner to developers, to make sure that they get what they need to do our part in promoting the games, and to allow the developers to focus on the development so that they don't get mired down in everything else that is involved with bringing a game to players and promoting it out there. So in terms of contracts, our approach at Hood Horse, we have a somewhat an approach that we believe in terms of publishing contracts, and that is we do, generally speaking, with most of our contracts, flat percentage splits between the publisher and the developer with no recoup terms. So that's probably the most, if we're talking about sort of like specific approaches we do in publishing, that's probably the most...
You mentioned the term there, so that somebody who hasn't signed a contract before might not know so much about. So that's like a recoup, for example. What does that mean in this context?
Recoup means basically, this is something that's common to many publishing contracts. It means that whatever costs the publisher incurred are first recovered by them before the developer starts to get paid a share of the sales. So which I mean, it works out well in success when games don't always go as well as initially expected. It can mean the developer is short on cash when they need it to support and expand the game after release. So we avoid those things in our publishing contracts and have, generally speaking, just flat percentage split shared from the beginning between publisher and developer. The other thing that we try to do, which goes to the way the contract is, but also goes to the behavior, is we try to share responsibility and decision-making with the developer. So rather than, I mean, probably the reason, I said at the beginning, there's some popular conceptions about publishers aren't always positive. Probably the reason is a lot of gamers remember games and they think about, oh, well, the publisher rushed this game out too fast and made the developers release it before it's ready. Or, oh, the publisher demanded that the developer change the game in this way, and that, that ruined the creative vision. And that's something that we also avoid because we keep the contractual rights in the developer to make sure that they're guiding what's in the game, that they have approval that the game is ready to release, and ensure that those sort of things can't happen. So those are, I think, the two basic approaches that we have with our publishing contracts.
Sebastian?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have many hard rules. Like, we do everything from I mean, you can do fully funded versions where you will have one split. You can do co-publishing deals, and that's when the developer stands for the development of the game and the publisher the rest. And there might be some additional investment there, and then you will have a different split. And we kind of do. If there's anything that we have learned throughout the years, it's that there's no one way to do any game project. They're all very different, and developers have very different needs, and projects have very different needs. So, I mean, I'm sure it's the same with everyone around this table, but I mean, they're very much custom. I can say there's one thing that we do that I think is probably different to many, and that's that we, at least at Paradox Arc, we're looking for the next Paradox game. We're looking for the next big thing for Paradox, but with very small teams. But that means that we're looking for teams who want to work with us for a very long time, given that it's so the project is successful. So we always want to have an angle where we can work for a long time together if it's successful. That's very, very important to us. We're not in this to find, to get a cash grab or to do a short-term win, even though, we want what's best for the project, but we're in it to find something that will last for a decade. And that's important to us. That's a major difference, I think.
Interesting. And so, Johan, how about Goblins?
Yeah, I would say pretty similar to Sebastian. We have very different contracts because we are also signing games with very different scope. So we can sign games from 50,000 euros need for a production to nearly 800,000. So it could be very different, and you don't have the same needs. So, but in general, we have similar contract and team. We have also different contract that's signing the prototype with a first refusal term. So sometimes some developer can come only with an idea. They don't have even a prototype, and you can fund a small part. And the first refusal is really easy to understand. When the prototype is finished, they can present to you. You can propose a contract, they accept or not, and after they continue. So we have very different contract. It's difficult to say you will find that contract when you come at Goblins.
So yeah, that's interesting. And so us, I think we all share, part of this. We have to be able to adapt, obviously, to the situation. We have signed full contracts on a presentation standpoint. For example, somebody came with a pitch and we signed it, and then we talked through it in detail. I'm not sure it will always be then the budget that you thought it would be at the pitch stage, but and we also a little bit like Tim and Hooded Horse, we make sure that the publisher that the developer gets paid from the first basically from the first game sold, so that we have so that they start making money immediately without waiting for recoup. But then we often we step up kind of the revenue share for the developer gradually as the game makes money. But they start making money very early. And I think for us, the sustainability of the relationship is really important. Nobody gains anything if the developer goes bankrupt just as the game is about to release, just because you didn't pay them enough to do kind of the first bug fixes and all that kind of stuff. So there's also, being responsible to the developer, but also to obviously the players of the game, right?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think what a good contract is a contract where both parties are incentivized to do the best for the project.
Yeah.
And a bad contract is when one is and one isn't, because then you're gonna get you're gonna get two sides of the coin not working together, right, on the thing. And that's certainly something that has happened in our industry before. So
yeah. One thing that comes up there, so what's your take on kind of the IP? Because that's often something that's IP, so that's kind of what happens after the game is released and in the future. Do you have an approach to that specifically?
Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Well, so we will typically do. I mean, again, like there's no hard rules for anything really. Like everything is negotiable. We do a lot of co-publishing deals where the IP and the game belongs to the developer, and where if we would come to a situation where we would part ways for different reasons, and they keep the rights to their game and the rights to their IP, and we have there's no reason for us to want to disrupt that in any way. If we want to have a very long-term relationship, there is a point of owning the IP, because when you own the IP, you can invest more in the IP for a very long time, and that's where if we want to do something for the next 10 years, and we like working with each other, then we are open for that as well. But in that case, the developer will get paid hands if that would happen. And we would never do that if the developer wouldn't continue to be interested in working with us on the game.
It's one thing that I think often is really important to understand, whether in the end, like, the publisher is completely dependent on the developer, and in many cases, and most cases, vice versa. So it's actually, it's, at least for our size of projects, it's not that we're, for the most part, talking about having the Star Wars IP. So the IP itself has a huge value, and that will, no matters who is the director who's going to make it. In the end, it is super dependent on the people that are actually driving specifically that game vision, and so it's we're really completely codependent on each other, actually. And so
I just want to add that I think that the just to chime in, because I completely agree with you, and especially in the genre that we're all in, like in strategy and simulation games, like you can't just take a deep strategy game and give it to someone else. Like, I really don't think that you could take the Europa Universalis concept and give it to someone and say copy it. I think it's impossible. I think it's completely impossible to do. So I mean, even if we would own the IP, like, we would still be deeply dependent on the developer who had the original vision for the game, and creative ownership is very important in our business.
And Johan, what about Goblins? Do you?
In general, in publishing, we never take the IP. We often negotiate more about different deals, about DLCs. It's something that will be important to have in the beginning of the relation, to agree with the same idea, in which case we will develop DLC or not. And after, we don't have special clause in the contract about sequel or other stuff, but in general, when the relationship is good all along the project, developer will come to you to develop the next game or sequel or other stuff like that. So in general, if you don't have a problem with the relationship, you don't need to have special line in the contract about that.
Yeah, and I think that Anders, I want to agree with what you were saying, that the IP ownership is really most valuable in the hands of the developer. No one else can do. I mean, if they create the first game, no one else can follow that up in the way they can. And it's just, leaving it in the hands of the developer, I think, is part of having a publishing contract that tries to create the maximum value for both sides. Because, yeah, the publisher can do something with the IP ownership, but never as valuable as what the developer could do.
Yeah, we share that as well. But and also, from our perspective, we're not thinking about taking control over an IP, but in certain instances, for example, when our investment has been really significant, we do want to participate in the success. And so even though, and that can have, different types of look different in different situations, but basically it shouldn't be in a way and not either that kind of prevents there from being new cool games or new stuff coming out from that IP. But that's so that's how we are dealing with it. But we don't believe in taking control over the IP, at least so far. Who knows what's going to happen in the future, right? But
yeah, when talking about publishing contract terms in general, one thing I think, and I should say that my background, way before I was involved in game publishing, I was a lawyer. So I think a lot about contract terms. And one thing that I think is important for developers to do is, a savvy indie developer, he's got a contract offer from a publisher. He's going to start looking around. What do people talk about? And there's certain things people talk about a lot. They talk a lot about how the money goes, the percentage split, and they talk a lot about IP ownership. But there's also really, really seemingly small parts of a publishing contract that are absolutely critical and that you should pay very close attention to. And some of them are things like, are royalties, when are royalties paid from the publisher to developer? How frequently are they? Because there's a huge difference between monthly royalty payments and quarterly royalty payments in the period after release. Because you have to think, okay, well, if it's quarterly royalty payments, so that means that the publisher will pay the developer 4 times a year. Steam takes a couple of months, a month, basically the month after sales happen is when Steam pays at the end of that month. You could actually be in a situation where it's 4 months after release before you actually receive money as a developer if there's quarterly royalty payments in the contract. So you have to think about terms like that. Do you have the cash flow? If it is quarterly, how are you going to pay for things after release so you don't have to lose your staff? And it's a seemingly kind of term like, oh, who cares? Like how many times I get paid a year, but it can have dramatic implications for how things go. At the same time, looking at terms like that deal with termination, what happen? Is the publisher allowed to terminate this contract for their convenience? What happens if they end up doing that? What ends up, are there, crushing terms as a result? All these sort of like seemingly small parts of a publishing contract that don't get talked about much can actually be absolutely critical. So it's one of the cases where you really want to look closely at all those aspects.
I agree with that, and I would also add to it that it's very, very easy to get stuck on a number, on a percentage, on each. You have 3 publishers, right? And someone says, well, it's 70-30 our favor. Someone says it's 50-50, and someone says it's 70-30 your favor, right? But you also have to consider what you're buying, right? Like, what are you going to get for your percentage, right? And that's going to, it's going to vastly differ depending on who, which publisher you get and what it says in the contract, right? But I think a lot of people will just look at like that big number, and that's going to make them decide.
But for example, one example of that, Sebastian, is what kind of marketing will the publisher do, and what kind of investments, maybe outside of the game specific funding, will the publisher do?
But not only marketing, it's also about the current audience you already have, the match with the other games, how they manage the long tail of the previous game. It's a lot of different factors. And I agree, you have some publishers that giving a lower share, but you have a lot of stuff in the recoup, like even salaries from the publishing part. And after, when you have everything in the recoup or some, it's not very common for strategy game, but more for publisher doing some consoles or other stuff like that. You have also the cost of goods that could be very, very different and too much flexible on the contract. And after you, if you have some physical stuff, you can be paid on quarter. Be paid on a quarter is a real disaster. We do only 30 days for the payment after the Steam payment, and we still see a lot of publishers doing 60 or 90 days. 60 days could be discussed. I think it's a question about the cash flow on the different MG you will pay before the release. So it could be fine, even if I think it's not fair, but it's a personal opinion. But it could be fine depending on the MG, but over 60 days for me.
Johan, you're mentioning MG. What is that?
Yeah, MG, it's a minimum guarantee that you give to the developers. So MG have different signification. Moreover, in French, you have two definitions for MG, but in general, I would say it's money you give to the developer. Depending on the contract, it could be a recoupable MG or not. So it means you have to refund from the sales to the publisher, but it could be also MG give to like a guarantee of the revenue the developer will have. So you can have sometimes 60 days of payment, but a big MG at release. So in that way, it's not something unfair for me. But it's a lot of combination of elements in the contract that you have to consider. And the best for me is to always to ask to a publisher to give a forecast to the developer.
I have another suggestion. If you do find yourself in a tricky situation, you should tell your publisher well in advance, because they are, as I said before, they're also actually quite interested that you're not going bankrupt before you at least made an update or two and you know what's going to happen with the game. So you can often find some ways to kind of breach a certain situation and so on.
Yeah,
unless the relationship is really shot already.
Yeah, I think on Sebastian's point, in terms of looking beyond, and also your point, Anders, on relationships. The reality is, if you have a game that's doing pretty well on Steam on your own marketing, especially if you've already announced it, you're probably going to get emails from 30 publishers, who are saying, well, we've got, our team has X number of years of experience in the industry across such great companies as, A, B, and C, and list out, some very impressive thing. And, it comes in different forms. It comes in the form of the sort of like, hey, Steam's really hard to get noticed. We have, you need us. Or it comes into the form of like, we're so good, we offer the golden key. But when you look into it, many of these publishers actually don't have a record of success for what they've done, both for released games and for unreleased games. And they could be offering you any kind of terms. It's actually really easy to get for them to offer, to Sebastian's point, really seemingly favorable financial terms. Oh, we'll only take X%. Well, that's fine. It works for them because they're not going to do anything for you. So you have to really look, as Sebastian said, into what is actually being offered from them. And you should never assume that they're going to do better for you than they did for the games that they are already publishing. And you really have to watch out, because and the other thing is, when you're looking into how they did for the games publishing, don't fall into the trap of looking at their big hit, because it's easy for a company to have one big hit. The question is, how did they do for the rest of the games in their portfolio? And there are publishers that operate under the express model of they're going to publish as much as they possibly can, and they're going to hope that 10% of their games actually are big hits, and those 10% end up being where they make their profit, and they're just going to abandon all support of the other 90%. And that kind of opportunistic behavior you really have to look out for. So I would say, when you're judging publishers, don't judge them on their best performing. Judge them on how they're, how basically, I wouldn't say they're worst, because sometimes things are out of the control of the publisher, but definitely judge them on how the whole weight of their portfolio is performing and how well they do for the titles that aren't performing as well.
Maybe check how they success or not to manage when a developer could fail, because you also have a different situation as a publisher. You can have some developers that we already have the guys developers that give up the project at the middle of the project, and you have multiple solutions. Will you hire some people to finish the project? How do you manage the communication? You can check also the games that have mixed review on the Steam page. Mixed review is difficult to evaluate because it could be a problem from the development linked to management from the publisher or not. It's a big discussion, but it could be also a problem to marketing strategy. It could be both. So it's something that could be difficult to analyze, but it's something interesting to see when a game is going wrong, how the publisher will manage it. If he will continue to push also after the release, it's something very important.
Super good point. I think maybe we change pace a little bit. And so we actually had the questions, and I think it's really relevant for a lot of people that would be interested in this discussion. Is so, what stage do you need to what stage does a game need to be in to be published? We already touched a little bit about this earlier, and more in general, like what do we want to see to be able to decide on publishing a game? I can start a little bit myself, and so I think for us, and we already touched, as I said, we have signed games that on just the presentation, where we really like the concept, but that was combined with a willingness from the developer to really kind of work together with us on the concept. But we also, I think now the easier way to get published with us would be to have a convincing prototype that's playable and an ID or a target render of what it would look like. It's not necessarily I think ideally you would also have it like implemented in the game and everything like that, but we're completely fine with just saying, okay, so this is what the game would look like when it's played. But it's not actually linked to all the systems yet, and here we have, but you can play it, and it might not look that great. So I think those are kind of, if you have those components like the gameplay and what it would look like, I think that for us it's really compelling. Sebastian, have you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've signed games on a presentation as well, but usually that's from the less like. The games industry does not lack for good ideas. That's the biggest truth I can drop today. I think there's we see about 1,000 game pitches a year in our team. If you the more abstract the pitch, so like if it's just a piece of paper, for us the pedigree of the team needs to be in the same realm, right? So the more abstract the pitch, the better rep the team needs to have, and the more executive ability they need to have demonstrated before, right? Because the risk increases the less you have to play. Ideally, we want the prototype as well that's playable. We don't look at, like, I prefer 100 times out of 100 a game where the core loop is fun over something that looks nice. And I can tell from having received pitches that look really nice but don't play very nice that's something that some are unused to. There's a lot of publishers who will want like a lot of production value very early, and that's certainly not what Paradox Arc is about. Like, we're gameplay, right? Is it fun? That's the only thing that matters to us. So if you have something that's fun, you're halfway there, I would say, with us.
Okay. Johan?
For us, it's pretty similar. We've signed only 2 games on pitch, so it's really more about investing in a team that directly on the project. Of course, the project needs a good elevator pitch, but you are putting more money on the team, on the collaboration over the project only. I like to have prototype or vertical slice. it doesn't need to have directly the art implemented. It could be only some mock-up of the final visual you want to target. And after, I would say for the biggest project, recently we prefer to have an announced game because it's more and more difficult to get a game in the lineup when you already wait the announcement, and if you already have a Steam page up, the announcement used, and you don't have a lot of wish list, is something sometimes difficult to ramp up after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tim, anything to add here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think largely, I think Sebastian presented the spectrum well, which is that as a game is more developed, as there's more to show, then it relies a bit less on the team and their pedigree and what they've done in the past. But as it's earlier and there's less to show, it relies a lot more on who the team is. I think, in general, we've mostly signed games that are pretty far along. I think we've signed a lot of announced games, I guess sort of a little bit dissimilar to what Johan was saying, because a lot of our games have been announced before. And, I think what it comes down to really in the end for us is that second part of the question that you posed, Anders, what do we look for in the game? Because the truth is, there are, there are tons of games being made, but, there's the special quality that truly wonderful strategy games have, where they're doing something innovative. They're breaking new ground. They're exploring something that hasn't been explored before. And doing that and doing it well is a somewhat rare thing to find. So in the end, I think that when we come across one of those games and it shows through in how the developer presents it and what it is. I mean, we're actually on the last day of TactiCon, the Monday, the 26th, we're releasing Terra Invicta, and Terra Invicta is just a completely unique game. It's inspired by hard sci-fi works. It's a space strategy game confined to a solar system. It has geopolitics kind of space. I mean, there's nothing else that could replace that. So whatever stage it's at, if it has that unique approach, which wonderful strategy games tend to have, I think that's something that we would always consider.
I think it's a good point. I think what's interesting here is that actually the four of us in some cases, but there might be games that we will all be kind of competing about. I know, so that's really interesting. If you do have that game that Tim is talking about, I think you should reach out to all four of us and get that in front of us and get a nice little bidding war going. So how we work is when we look at something, we have to be also kind of convinced about the replayability value of a game. I think in this, like among strategy games, part of the magic of strategy games is that they're often dependent on systems in a way that there's lots of variation that you can play that you can have, so that gives a lot of replay value. And that's part of, I think, as I said, like part of the magic of this whole genre is that just by changing starting conditions, and that can give you another super fun 20 hours or 30 hours of gameplay. So we're thinking a lot about replay value. I personally think a lot about whether the developer knows who the game is for. And so if you know who the game is for, that means that you can make features for that person. I'll give a stupid example. When we developed Other Side, we had lots of discussions about whether we should use quick time events, for example, in the game. And if you're making a tactical game, the classical tactical mechanics, quick time, you're making that for the players of those types of games, and they hate quick time events. So like, if you really understand who you're making the game for, it's much easier to say, okay, we're going to do this feature rather than that feature. We'll drop this because it's just not, that's not core of experience for this person.
Yeah, I mean, for us, replayability is like it's 1, 2, 3, and 4 on our prioritization list. Paradox does. I mean, we do deep, complex, endless is what we always talk about at Paradox, and we would much rather have that than something that looks shiny. And it definitely goes. I mean, I think CK3 looks pretty good these days. But that's for the big Paradox Interactive. Paradox Arc, we're much more into looking at the kind of I mean, suffering from analysis paralysis is not a problem for us. It's an opportunity to discover more about the game. That's kind of how we look at it, and especially when you get when you get a prototype, like we don't need it to look like it. You can have white boxes. It doesn't matter. Like that's fine for us. But if you don't have a core, if you don't have something of a core, maybe not a finished core loops, because that's very hard to do for a strategy game that early. Like it usually takes a lot of iterations before you're there. So definitely not a requirement, but you need to have something there that's fun and enticing. Otherwise, it's just paint.
Yeah, I actually said in my notes we should give examples if we could. So I can actually give 2 examples. So the two games that we have announced is Great House of Calderia, which is kind of grand strategy, an adaptation on the grand strategy concept, and that was the one that we signed on the pitch. But the pitch had this idea of what it would do different in making a grand strategy game with all the depth and the interest of a grand strategy game, while making it more tangible. And so making it more instead of having resources just being numbers, they're coming from somewhere. People have like some place in the world, etc. And that was really interesting. And then on top of that, we really liked working with the development team on figuring out kind of the details of what that would look like. And then we have the other one is USC Counterforce that we announced basically, I think, this week, the day when we are actually recording this. And that was a game that is a sequel to a small tactical game, which just like so much depth in mechanics, everything, and just the Lisa, the key developer who has been working on this game for 5 years, like all my ideas she already came up with herself, and she had already thought it through, and she was just a complete master of all the mechanics and in the game. And so in this game we had another role, and that was kind of helping them just to kind of tick it up a little bit more in visuals and that kind of stuff to get it a little bit more sexier. But in terms of challenge, like fundamental development challenges, very different situation. Does anyone else have an example of a game that they might want to talk about that you feel comfortable talking about in terms of when it was signed, or worry about signing?
I can try to give more example. For Goblins, we are signing, I would say, more different game because we are more targeting not only hardcore gamer but more mid-core, and we are also doing a lot of Switch on mobile. So we will have a different point of view probably. We know we are targeting mainly turn-based game, city builders and tycoons. So we have different target on we've signed one city builder only on the pitch because it was easy to understand. They say we want to do something between Frostpunk and Kaiser Pharaoh. So it was easy to understand with a different ecosystem to manage, and with art style like Mobius. So it's very evident that it's relevant that you have something interesting and you can jump in if you are sure that the team will follow, as it's always a big risk. But we are also signing very small game, I would say roguelikes in the branch. It could be I can say it's no, because it will be announced tomorrow or in 2 days. But we have signed recently Racine. It's a deck building auto battler. So you have some unique combination, and it's only fun to play. It's not you don't have a lot of replayability because it's a small scope. What it's sure at Goblins, when it's outside the classic lineup, we tend to not signing the game with too much narrative part, because we know we are more on the mid-core, we have a short session, and when the game has too much, the lore isn't a problem, it's really much about narrative system. When we have games, when we release some screenshot on Steam with a lot of text on event choice, for example, it's always a discussion with the player about the difference with agency on narrative part. So I don't know if it's enough comment about X-Brain for the players. Maybe it's a high concept level of the different kind of players, and you need to understand also the audience. And for example, on our side, the audience doesn't like RNG, doesn't like too much text, and you have to manage that when you select the different games.
Interesting. So are there some types of games that you could definitely refuse then? Like if you say this pitch, this type of pitch you would absolutely not do? Any quick examples?
I think we had a example recently. We had a game on space city building, station building, I would say, and everything looks correct, but they had some kind of promotion of crypto NFT. So it was something more like that. Or if you have, yes, it's more about the team or about different way, because we are taking care about some, I would say, not slow gaming, but we often use the terms that low impact gaming, that we signed a lot of game with small size on the disk, low use of energy during the game. We are signing a lot of small games.
Yeah. Okay. And so, Sebastian, do you have any game that you would really refuse? Anything obvious?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a lot of games we would refuse. I won't say any specific genre, because that's just such a boxy way of just looking at games, I think. But generally, for me, and for us, if it's anywhere near being a casual experience, there's someone else who can take care of that. That's much better fit than we are. We're looking for stuff that's deep, complex, and less. We're flexible in the other areas, so to speak, in terms of genre and whatever. I don't see us making a FPS soon. So that's probably one of the ones that we would never make. But generally, like, we generally don't do shallow games. We want them to be incredibly deep, almost to the point where it's ridiculous.
Tim, anything that you would refuse?
Yeah, I mean, this is first of all, I want to join Johan in saying we wouldn't touch anything with NFTs involved.
That's hygiene level. Come on.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think probably we're all just around the table nodding our heads because I mean, it's and at this point, it's not even us being good guys. It's just a reaction of the fact that any of us, with a thinking brain, knows the reaction that consumers would have of touching anything involving with NFTs. Although I will very much say that I hated NFTs from the beginning, but the truth is it would be suicide for the reputation of a company to especially in strategy games, I think. But okay, leaving aside NFTs, which is low hanging fruit. I think we do a wide variety of games. All of them are strategy, and we also sometimes say strategy, simulation, and RPGs. And mainly that's because, sort of like what Sebastian was saying, it's hard to box in exactly what we mean. And so the strategy is at the core of everything we do. But there are really interesting, deep experiences, Sebastian was saying, that can take place within the context of something that might more properly be called an RPG. It's a little hard to categorize all games. We have one game, Sons of Valhalla, that is a pixel art 2D side-scrolling base building action game. I'm just throwing a bunch of words out. They all describe it, and you can easily call it strategy because you're in tactical. You're raising little Viking 2D pixel art guys, and they're following you and forming shield walls, and you're using siege engines to attack enemy things. I just, the mix of genres on this is just confusing because in the end, it's like Sebastian said, it's hard to box in a game, and the more innovative and interesting the game is, sometimes the harder it is to box in exactly what it is. It's not to say that there are...
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to add to that, and the players will have a completely different definition of the genre that you have.
Yeah, that's right.
I've seen studies that say that FIFA is a strategy game, and if that's a strategy game, then everything's a strategy game.
Yeah.
So we try to be sweet about how we defined it. So we defined it as games where the brain is the most important muscle, which doesn't necessarily tell you a lot about it. But on top of that, we're actually trying to build. No, we're just on this starting out on our publishing journey, right? But we're trying to build games that will, over time, have share each other's communities in some sense. Like not everybody's going to want to play every game that we make, but the idea is that if you played one of our games, there should be a pretty good chance that you would like to play some of the other games. But when I come to the games that we really wouldn't, we would not publish a game that is made by an auteur that wants to, the French word auteur, which, basically a creator dictator that wouldn't be willing to be able to work with us and take input from communities and play tests and our own points of view when you're working the game. We believe that the more people that can have a say, that doesn't mean that everybody gets to decide, but if the more inputs that you can take, that actually have quite a bit of chance to making the game better. And so we would not work with somebody who's just going to say, I'm Alpha and Omega, I decide everything, and you're just going to sell the game. So that's not how we work.
So this is interesting because here we are differing opinions actually.
Nice.
Because now I'm gonna sound like I'm in a way that I don't want to sound, but I don't believe in creative committees.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, and I think that I'm happy to through the years I've done a ton of market research, and at every given opportunity I will give that to the developer, but I will tell them, read this, ask me if you want my interpretation of it, but do with it however you will, right? Because I think I know what a good game is, and I probably do, but I have no idea how to make it. I really don't. I think you need to have the more control. And I've been in a situation where, the bigger the money is, the bigger the project is, the more control you want to put in on it because it's scary and it suffocates a project. That's my personal opinion on it. So I would much rather just go, you guys go, and I'll have my faith in that. That doesn't mean that I won't say what I think about something, right? I'll definitely offer my opinion, but it's going to be very much you can do with that however you will, right? Because I think if there's something deeply flawed with something that I really don't like about the project, I don't think I can change that.
Yeah, I think I probably lined up pretty well with Sebastian in terms of our level of involvement. That is to say that, the developers, and I think the developers are leading development, but as Sebastian said, as publishers, there's room to give feedback for them to decide what they want to do with it. So, and this takes a lot of forms. Sometimes it takes the form of monitoring everything coming into the Steam forum during times when it's incredibly active and basically giving the developer a summary of, look, here's what players are saying in the Steam forum, take a look at it, see what you want to do. Sometimes it takes the form of, hey, here's a mock review, or sometimes it takes the form of, this YouTuber that we're talking to, he gave us this feedback for you, or, hey, this YouTuber video actually, and here I'll, thank, just the amazing job that YouTubers do in going out there and covering games and offering their feedback. Because sometimes it's as amazing as just like, hey, here, developer, this YouTuber played your game, loved it, had some great feedback for changes. And, we've heard back from developers when we've done this, like saying like, wow, we should really credit this YouTuber as an assistant designer for all the feedback that they gave. So I think that as a publisher, being a conduit for providing stuff for the developer to consider is something that we very much do, while, as Sebastian said, avoiding directly involving ourselves in the creative decision-making.
It's like, I think to me, it's like a service that we provide, right? Rather than anything else. We do have, at Paradox Arc, I've got Dale, who's my main community guy, and he's amazing at doing these things, right? And every developer that we've ever worked with have really appreciated that, right? But to me, they need to really feel that they are in charge of this game creatively, because otherwise, who owns the vision? Because games are so complex, they're so hard, they're so difficult, right? It's like 50% science, 50% art. You don't know which part is which, and you have like a million different pieces that need to work together. And I think that you need to have an extremely strong focal point, focus when you make a game.
Yeah, I will say though that I think this points to the idea that different publishers can fit different developers better, because Anders, the experience, I'll just tout them a little bit. I mean, they have amazing background as developers. So if you're a developer that's looking to have a publisher relationship where you're going to look for that kind of support, advice, guidance, additional assistance, I mean, from everything, it's especially hard for smaller indie teams sometimes to have expertise in every aspect. So there are definitely, I can imagine hypothetical me's where I did something much more interesting than publishing and tried, creating a development studio, where I would want to go and talk to, Sebastian, because I want to be left in charge of everything. And other types of games or situations I could be in where I would want to go to Anders and Firesquid, because I want to have a publisher who's going to get their hands into things and help me with this. And I can definitely think of reasons I'd go to Johan and Goblins, because I have to say at this point, Johan, you did such an amazing job of sort of creating a coherent portfolio that I can look at a game and think this is a Goblins game, or this belongs in Goblins. This is the perfect game for them. So it really is about some games, as Anders said, they would fit all of us potentially. Everyone, why not submit widely? But some games just really have particular needs, and you're looking for a particular kind of thing, and it can make sense to look for that in publisher.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the same way, I think where I wanted where I agree is exactly what Sebastian is saying in terms of, or both of you are saying in terms of games are super complex. You need to have a strong driving force. That ownership needs to live with the developer. So I completely agree with that. It's not that it would be completely unreasonable for us to take creative control over a game. But what we do want to do is to be, take that little bit extra proactive, lean into the fact that we're actually all developers ourselves, and that we're sitting in a developer organization kind of more clearly than expressly. So, for example, just an example for USC Counterforce, for example, the game mechanic, I had nothing to add to anything when it comes to or anyone in the team in terms of mechanics or how the game works or the idea behind the story or whatever. But what we could do is that we had our sound design guy work together with Lisa to kind of really up that a little bit. Some simple stuff. Maybe we should have some more camera shake on certain things, like stuff that an outside eye that is used to developing video games can add. And then in other situations, we're much more involved in terms of making sure that we get to where we think the core loop needs to be in terms of overall quality and all that kind of stuff. But in the end, fundamentally, the driving force needs to come from the developer. Otherwise, I think you're screwed. Unless you have, orders of magnitude bigger budgets, basically.
Yeah.
Even then, I think you're screwed.
You have 8 studios in your back pocket who can just throw people at the problem. That always works.
Yeah, exactly.
I think maybe it's one element interesting probably when you have one development studio and one publisher, you can be very flexible. So you can help sometimes on the production, sometimes I don't know if everyone here have a line designer also in the team probably, but it's something that would be really helpful for people who doesn't know what is a line designer. It's a game designer specialized in feedback reviews. It could be external to the publisher or internal, but it's someone with an external point of view that will come to help a game designer, for example, in the production. You can have some developers that will be specialized in a very small part of development, like UI or gameplay or multiplayer, whatever. It could be a very, very great help on the project. Maybe one subject could be interesting to talk. It's about the milestones, because we've talked about Sebastian mentioned that the stress that could be put from the developer on the team, and it's something that made from start at Goblins. We never sign any milestone on the project, so we define each time a period that we support the developer until an early access, for example, and if we have some delays, we will discuss a new time. But I know a lot of publisher is working with Milestone, so I don't know if you are still working with Milestone, but maybe if you are doing, how do you manage to keep that flexibility at the same time that you have Milestone to be sure to have, I suppose, a minimum of security on your side?
That's a
I
good
can tell
question.
how we're working with milestones. We define very specific milestones, and then we don't actually care if they're followed, as long as the game game advances in a way that we think is good. But the fact that having milestones, actually the fact of establishing milestones means that you're kind of forcing yourself to be more clearly aligned in terms of what should be, like what's showing that the game is on the right path, so that you kind of have that up front. But if we look at our milestone, each milestone plan, I think is too old, like a week after it was designed. Often it's old already when you sign it, but you just have to be aware of that. And it's just or at least for us, it's a way to make sure that we did think about what needs to come first. And then it gives us every time we do have milestones and we approve milestones, but that basically means, do we still believe that the project is on track? And I think that is actually quite helpful. I don't know how the rest of you guys are doing.
Yeah, I think we're pretty close to Johan. So we haven't had milestones in any of our contracts so far. I just agree with Anders' perspective that everything changes really quickly. And there's just it's game development is that nature. It's very, very hard to predict. Indie game development can sometimes be harder to predict. I mean, we've had games where the developer's gotten sick for a while, and we've had the lead developer, and that's just huge with an indie game, because it's not like there's a ton of no one to really replace that. We've had games where local disasters, fires sweeping across a place have forced a developer to evacuate their home for a while, and that changes things too. And we've and games definitely change in terms of the what the developer's thinking as they develop it, what ends up working well. So I do think flexibility is critical in this, whatever way it's handled.
Yeah. I've personally worked in both. With Paradox Arc, we've made an active choice not to do milestone schedules as part of any contract, or to me it's also I see the value of having milestones, definitely, especially for long, complex projects that they are, right? But with Paradox Arc, if the dev wants to use one, that's fantastic. If they want to use it to show us where they're headed, that's fantastic as well. It's up to them. We don't have it as a requirement.
Interesting. So we're coming up on an hour now, and I was thinking, I think it would be, I thought that maybe you should help people a little bit to choose, the right publisher among us, depending on, so if you want to, you have a few minutes or a minute or two maybe to do your spiel for your publisher rather than mine or whoever is around here. So I don't know who wants to go first. Do you want to go first, or?
Why not? Well, how to say that in 1 minute? I think the probably big power of Goblins that we are already specialized in these sections of strategy and simulation. When I say simulation, it's really city builder and tycoons mainly. The big power of Goblins is to have a mastery of the cross promotion system, every marketing coming from Facebook ads to streamers and other stuff, and we can help during all the production process. Like I say, we have a development studio, so we understand perfectly what is a production, when we could help. We have a lot of different employees that could help on the partial part of the development if you need. And mainly we can do also port in-house and expand the game on the console and mobile. So of course not on the game because we have a very PC first games, but it's something that we can help. And I think it's already a lot of that part on the flexible contract that we can propose, but more and more, a lot of publisher can propose now flexible contract. We are less in the, I would say, in the old period when a lot of publisher are very ugly contract with some hidden clause. I think I won't say it's finished and you don't have any problem with any developer or any publisher, but it's less aggressive on the contract side.
Tim?
So I Hooded Horse, we're trying to do strategy games. I honestly, one part of the question I will say is this: I think that it's a good idea if you've got a strategy game to submit it to strategy game publishers, ones who focused on it, like everyone here. I'm not sure if anyone should ever narrow themselves that far down between us. At least 3 out of 4 should be there. And because if you're narrowing it that, if you got a strategy game and you're busy deciding why, well, just this one publisher among the 4, man, you're not going to be submitting to almost anyone. So the truth is, what I think you should look for in a publisher, what I hope Hooded Horse represents, what I will say that I think everyone else at this table represents as well, is that these are publishers who actually do a good job for their games and care about their games and invest in them. And that's what I've hoped Hooded Horse will be. I hope it shows in terms of the results, and that we tend to have a fairly consistently good performance among our released games, among our unreleased games, in terms of marketing them. And I would encourage basically I'll answer a bit of the reverse question, which is that if you're narrowing down your list, and I know I mentioned this earlier, but I would avoid the opportunistic kind of publisher, the one who has one hit and 8 games that went nowhere and they've just abandoned support for. Look for publishers that invest in all of their games, that do a good job across the portfolio. And the second thing is look for a publisher that understands your game. And again, I will say that everyone here understands strategy games. So because the absolute travesty that is the Steam page of a game being marketed by a publisher who doesn't understand strategy games is, it's pretty bad because there's a particular way of talking to strategy gamers. There's a particular way of presenting strategy games. There's things they want to hear, and you need that expertise. There's particular YouTubers who cover this. There's particular ways in which you advertise. Definitely pick someone who understands your game. That's the biggest advice I have.
Sebastian?
Can't top that. That was a great spiel. So we're looking for the Paradox games of tomorrow, but we represent an outfit within Paradox that is very small, very flexible, and we know our players deeply. So if you think that your game shares Paradox DNA, and you want access to the Paradox audience, but you don't want the pressure that Paradox Interactive brings to it, but you want something that will represent the team that you are and the game that you have in a good way, then I think Paradox Arc is a good fit, hopefully, for you. And hopefully your game is very deep and very complex and has endless replayability.
That's great. And we actually touched a little bit on what I think Firesquid is a little bit different in the fact that we're a kind of developers publisher, in the sense that we really try to work with the developer. Well, obviously, as I said, they have the creative drive, but really try to proactively work with them. To an extent, maybe for smaller projects you might not otherwise do. But all our projects, even smaller ones that cost 50,000 euros, have the same kind of investment. We want every game to be as good as it can be, given its perspective and its scope and its market and so on. And I think I want to add, it's really important, if you understand your audience, your publisher should definitely understand your audience, because otherwise you'll have fantastic games with terrible terrible ratings because they sold something that it isn't. That's just awful.
Yeah. That's a really good point, because pick a publisher who will not obscure what the game is, right? Like I can just say for Paradox Arc, we only do gameplay trailers. It's like a hard rule that we have, and it's just because we don't want to represent a game in a way that it isn't, right? And I'm not saying you can't do like CGI and stuff like that. You can, and there are people who are great at doing that. But just in general, like look for a publisher that will not obscure what your game is, because that never works out in the long run.
No, can only agree.
Oh yeah.
I think maybe we should go to a little bit. I don't know, some lighter questions maybe for a bit. So on a personal note, this might be good when you're pitching games to us. What kind of games do you personally like, actually, as a player? Sebastian, maybe?
I'm very much an omnivore. But I played Paradox games since I was like 12, since my history teacher showed me Victoria 1. So I think I've got, it's kind of casual numbers for our audience, but I have a few thousand hours in them. I love Colony Sims. RimWorld, fantastic game. Congratulations on Clownfolk, by the way. Great game. I put a lot of time into that one. Man, I play a lot. I play a lot of games. But those I would say are my top ones right now.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
No, I was actually just going to ask Sebastian something, because he said he had a couple $1,000s into Paradox games, and I'm suddenly curious whether a perk of working at Paradox is getting all the game. Oh, hours. Okay, that makes more sense.
I probably did put $1,000 into it before I started working at Paradox, but yeah.
Now you get them all for free. That's a perk of working at Paradox.
It is probably one of the main ones, honestly. Like, yeah.
Johan, do you play games?
Yeah. No, I play only. I played a lot of board games, but in terms of video games, I think my preference is more for strategy turn-based. It could be JRPG or race-on game like Darkest Dungeon or more Curious Expedition or some stuff like that. And I love a lot of tycoons. I'm a big player of tycoons.
Yeah. Tim?
Yeah, I think I think similar to, the thing is, it's easy to love. Now I'm thinking of not all of the games published by Paradox and published by Goblins that I love, but anyway, I guess my tastes run across the entire range of what we publish. I will say there are basically. It's interesting because now I'm thinking about like games that I love playing and I'm good at, and games that I love but I'm not very good at. And there's plenty of examples in the lighter category. But if we include that, I think it's the range. I've just the range that we publish. We do Manor Lords, which is of course RTS city building on Earth, all the way to something like Nebulous Fleet Command that's space based, RTS, very just hard sci-fi space combat kind of thing. So it's just and I'll caveat all this by saying that I'm not sure I've had time to play a game for fun in about 2 years or 3 years, since things heated up here after starting Hooded Horse. So I've enjoyed playing them when I could also classify it as serving useful, like basically playing the games that we're publishing, playing a couple of other ones out there. But yeah, I kind of miss the time that I could just sit back and play for hundreds of hours.
Can I say something just on that, Tim? Because you said something that really resonates with me, and it's like, I've got a lot of hours in it, doesn't mean I'm good at it. And that's very much me in Paradox games. Like when I started at Paradox, I was served the biggest humble sandwich like I've ever eaten my entire life. When I sat next to a guy and we're doing like a developer clash with EU4, and I realized how little I know about that game after 800 play hours.
So I actually have when I was young, I loved all of the whole spectrum of like the strategy games. So I think Age of Empires 2 was just an amazing time, but mostly because I played them with friends. And one of my core beliefs is that no matter if the game is actually single player or multiplayer, they're kind of all multiplayer type games, because in the end you're going to share, either you played something with a friend in the couch, right? Or or if it's a true multiplayer, you share the experience directly. But otherwise, it's the stories that you'll tell to other people or to other people that play the game in a parallel session, and compare notes and how you like this and that. So that's what drove me to games in the first place. Is like that whatever you like, games are always kind of a way of sharing. It's always, at least to me, it doesn't have to be for everyone, but it's so often actually a community in itself. And that goes to what Johan was saying. I used to play board games and role playing. I still play board games. I don't play role playing games as much as I should, but I really love that kind of stuff. But I do have a guilty pleasure. That's League of Legends. Honestly, I've played. I don't want to check how much I've played, but I'm guessing I've played probably 4,000 hours, 5,000 hours. And
We've all been there, Anders. We've all been there.
That's what's so amazing to me.
Maybe not 4,000 hours, but we've all been there.
Yeah, I've played it now since 2011. So that's 11 years. And, I'm a proud silver, whatever, 4 or whatever the ranking is right now. And I'm never going to be better, unfortunately.
No.
But anyways,
we don't get faster with age.
However, like, it's hard to actually take time to enjoy other play. And I think part of the reason why I'm playing League so much is because, I know I only need, it takes an hour, but that hour, after that hour, it's done. And so I can then go on to other stuff. While a lot of games, like, to get something very significant, it's going to be a huge investment in time. And so now actually I spend an enormous amount of time to watch gameplay videos to understand the attraction of every second game, because there's so much research for us to do, right? So, Sebastian, was I keep cutting you off?
No, not at all. But something you said, Tim, about just not getting the time to play games for fun, like it's something that we kind of because I definitely recognize that, and it's that's, you just described my first 4 years at Paradox, and we've kind of in our team we force ourselves, like we have a set amount of hours every week, and it's die hard. You have to be there, and someone picks a game that we play together, just to kind of stay near the rails, and something I can really recommend, because it does, you don't otherwise. You just don't, right?
That's super interesting. Johan, did you? What kind of games do you play?
Me?
Yeah.
Already. At the moment, I'm playing a lot of both with Curious Expedition 2, mainly Run and Explorers, and a lot of different small roguelikes, but. I have some time to play because I'm doing less scouting than previously. So scouting, it's the fact to trying to find new game. But at the moment, I'm still taking a lot of pleasure to test the different demo I have. On I spent a lot of time on each. It's crazy to see the number of really fun game. It's more casual, of course, but to see the number of crazy idea in a game jam. People are so inventive. And after I played Against the Storm recently.
Well, thank you.
And it's a really good game. Initially, I didn't want to pick it, to be honest, because it was on Epic, and finally I took it after, I think, 2 weeks. But I received a pitch a long time ago when we were really small, and really love that project. It's really innovating to have that, to be really fast. It's a city builder, but with a roguelike exploration system. So
yeah, I appreciate you checking out Against the Storm. It's going to be, it's going to be arriving at Steam very soon. That's the one saving grace, actually, Sebastian. I can still, I've sort of been able to justify myself playing our games as well as potential games and pitches, because that's still that still qualifies as, as work. And I think we're getting there. I mean, it's one of the curses of a very young company, because we're only about 3 years old. Is just the level of time available. But the thing that saved me is the number of great games that have been submitted to us, some of which we couldn't publish, and then also the games that we're publishing, because then that's been fun.
Yeah, no, but I actually think that it's because it's so easy to forget that part, right? Because it just, everything starts to be about everything else. But I mean, I think the number one competitive advantage that each and every one of us can have is that we understand the game more than the next person, right? And you need to play, and you need to play a lot to be there. Otherwise, we're gonna lose touch. And I think it resonates a lot with when you have a developer, and you're able to reference their game in every single conceivable way. I think that's something that you notice. If you talk to a publisher and they have no idea what your game is all about, that's probably a red flag. But yeah.
Marketing a game well definitely requires understanding it. I mean, that's the fundamental thing. If you haven't played that game just a ton, you really can't know how to communicate what's special about it.
Yeah.
But actually, I find that this is one thing also where, yes, you have your own opinion, but I think it's really important where you can involve community members or just game play tests, because I agree, they won't be able to tell you how to change the game to make it different, but they can tell you what they think it feels like, for example.
Yeah.
So and helping, having people play test the game to really understand what is the message that would resonate, what is it that you would sell. But this, and obviously you playing it or us playing it is really important, but then having other people playing it and tell you, okay, this really feels like this is the feature that I really loved, and that kind of stuff that really helps you sell it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's both, right? And you're right that, and I mean, we did PDXCon a few weeks back, and we had people playing Victoria 3, and the second they start playing it, the second you start to realize that, oh wow, is this the game? Oh, this is apparently the game we've been making for the past gajillion years, and the players will always surprise you.
Yeah, I know.
Always. And
it's amazing. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's amazing how quickly they will be better at the game than you are. I think that's actually demoralizing.
It's extremely demoralizing.
Working on something for years, and then in the end, the game comes out 10 hours later. Somebody, whatever the game might be, they finished it already, or they completely broke all the mechanics, and I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So another kind of lightweight question that came from somebody online. So what part of history do you like the most? I know Paradox games is a lot about history. Our games are not about history so much, but I still like history a lot. Is history important to you guys, or?
Extremely. It's a huge interest. Well, now I work where I work, so saying that, it's maybe I shouldn't, because there are definitely other people who will be like, you don't know anything.
Tomorrow or whatever.
They'll tell me that I have no idea what I'm talking about in the original Latin, But I gotta say, my favorite period as a Swede is the 1600s, 30 Years' War, because it's just so fucking grim, dark, and chaotic, and fundamentally European in a way. And it's kind of one of, it's the era where, a certain number of countries were great, but nobody gives a shit about that era in modern times. So whenever I see a game that has it, I'm just I gotta play it. Probably 30 Years' War, I think, is fascinating. But everything is fascinating.
Johan, any?
I think my favorite period is Middle Age. It's really a lot of fantasies coming from that, and I'm a big fan of heroic fantasy and all those stuff like that. So probably my favorite.
So I'm a little stuck here because I actually have two different competing periods. So just way back before I got involved in game publishing, I was actually studying, I was in a PhD program at Harvard studying ancient Chinese history, intending to be a historian of the social and cultural history of Song Dynasty and Ming Dynasty China. So that was, so I should probably, I mean, Chinese history in particular, that period of time is something that I absolutely still do love. And there's still just some great enjoyment that I have from, reading things from the time. It's just, communicating with people, especially, I mean, the nice thing about ancient Chinese history is that there was a consistent language that was used from about, for several thousand years, which now is called classical Chinese or literary Chinese. So you can basically read anything. You can read people writing 2,500 years ago. You can read people writing 200 years ago. And you have access to the original language that was used for pretty much all of writing through that entire period. So there's just something wonderful about studying that. And I still, look nostalgically back and sometimes think what might have been if I hadn't done what I did, which is take a terminal master's and not complete the PhD program. So I'm a quitter, and I'll confess that. But then the other competing thing is what drew me into games, which was that so originally my wife, she's been studying Viking Age archaeology, and she started playing a DLC called Viking Conquest for Mount & Blade Warband. And she it's great. So she got really into it, and then she got me playing it. And then basically I thought, well, there's this is fun, but there's 12 or 13 or so little small things like the stat of a sword in this DLC that, really needs to be changed. It'd be so much more fun. And this began, the madness that is modding, because I ended up creating a mod called Viking Conquest Balance mod that went 13 versions. Yeah, no, it's out there on ModDB still, and you went 13 versions with increasingly long changelogs per version. I think the 13th version had a 10-page Word document changelog just for that one. So, and this was what got me into hey, maybe I should do video games, because a friend of mine approached me and said, hey, look, you clearly love video games. Let's talk about, you want to found a company, and so basically I should that's the other half of me wants to answer the Viking Age, because that was so important how I got here. So I'm torn between those two, and I'll just answer both, I suppose.
And so from my point, actually, I'm going to twist the question a little bit, because I love history. I love how important history is to so much that we see around us today. And for example, I'm also appalled at how spotty history knowledge is. For example, I went to Swedish school, and now with the whole Ukraine situation and Russia and all that stuff, I started learning a little bit more, and I realized that, my knowledge about the Second World War and the First World War is really limited in terms of what I knew about Eastern Europe. Not to talk about anything else. Like the First World War, I had no idea. Or maybe somebody told me, I'd forgotten that Germany actually took Ukraine and Finland and Baltics and so on during the First World War. It's just there's so much that you don't know, and it all actually, a lot of it is playing out today. So I think that's fascinating. But what I think even more fascinating is historical combat, and how cool actual historical combat is compared to the stupid stuff we see in movies, where they're trying to do some overwrought acrobatics instead of just looking at how incredibly cool the actual techniques of fighting were back in the day. And I guess so I spend way too much, the time that I don't spend playing League of Legends. And the other guilty pleasure is watching, historical martial arts and that kind of stuff, and figuring out how much cooler movies would be today if they actually learned how the fighting was done back in the time.
Yeah.
Honestly, guys, I think this was great. We should do this again.
Yeah.
But I think maybe to close off, any general, do you have any general advice to game developers? Maybe that somebody managed to last all this time listening to this. Any good ideas? Any parting words that you want to leave for aspiring developers or just fans that were interested in this subject?
Where to begin?
Yeah, I can have one or two advice really simple. I think one very important thing is trying to keep create through game jam or other stuff like that. On the fast creation is a thing is a thing really important to keep to have a prototype approach instead of trying to have the ultimate pitch and try to start a project with a funnel around all the project and finish with something not fun is maybe the biggest mistake you can do, because when you don't use some prototype and iteration, you will have it's not you will have, but you in the most of case people will try to increase the scope over and over, and you finish with a very big project when the core loop isn't mastered. So it's maybe the biggest problem. And after for the business part, I think the team's advice was the best is to try to find someone to help you in marketing if you need that love your game or are able to play your game and understand even your references. And I think it's a problem if you pitch someone with 2 or 3 game reference, and he can't even explain what is good in these games, and it's very difficult. And sometimes people try to say, yeah, I know Darkest Dungeon and I can explain what is good in Darkest Dungeon, and finally they explain you something totally different that what is the real experience of Darkest Dungeon, for example.
Interesting. Sebastian?
I think that's really good advice. And in general, don't and it can be very hard when you're a very small development team and etc. It's easier said than done, but don't put all your eggs in one basket in general. It goes with prototyping and putting all efforts into just one thing and just do or die with this or that. Because games development and games publishing is incredibly unpredictable. I would say
everything is always on time and on budget.
Yeah. So it's like when you're building a house. If everyone knew what it would cost in time and money to build a house, nobody would, right? So it's a good thing nobody knows. No, but I would also say read the contract and don't be afraid to negotiate. Right, I think a lot of indies will either redline everything or they will redline nothing. And the truth is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to come to a settlement where both parties are happy and both parties are winners and both parties will gain from making this a successful project. So don't be afraid to negotiate and talk about the contract.
Point, Tim?
So I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess, I'll go further on the contract point, since, Johan and Sebastian have said some great things about preparing yourself in terms of, how you approach development and getting ready for it. So in terms of looking for a publisher, I mean, I think the first thing is to recognize that it is possible to self-publish. And second, as a corollary, that publishers are not a necessary means and are not a guaranteed means of getting your game to be seen around. Signing with the publisher itself will do nothing. It all depends on what that publisher will do. So, I mean, really think first about what you need from a publishing arrangement. If it is funding that you need for development, then look at all your options. Think about publishers. Think about there are various, new types of entities, and they need to be, looked at with quite a bit of skepticism too, but various new types of funding investment entities. Think about all the possible options you have for funding and explore them. And then if it's that you want marketing, really validate that the publisher that you're looking at is actually good at doing that. And, go to sites like steamdb.com and look up the follower charts of their unreleased games and see what's happened. And if it was announced before they were a publisher, go look at the period of follower gain, because follower gain is in relation to a shipped game before they became publisher and after, and look for the difference. If they have released games, look for their record on their Steam publisher page, see how many reviews their released games have, compare it to how long it's been out to get an idea of how they sell. Really just, you're going to spend years creating a game. You should devote like at least a week of full time to just beating the bushes and researching every possible thing and validating it, because there are more bad publishers than there are good by far. You're going to get contacted by a bunch. And then by the same token, in addition to researching the ones you're looking at, don't rely on who reaches out to you. Go out there and spend a full day just researching what are the publishers out there that might be a good fit. Don't just rely on lists that are published. Go out there on Steam and see who's publishing games, and make sure that you reach out widely as well, because the best deal that you're going to get is one where you've picked people who you actually do want to deal with. And that you've found enough of them that in their varied situations, because there could be situations where one publisher is great, but your game doesn't fit them this year, or they have other commitments, so it's not going to work out this year. So get yourself a good well-researched list, narrow it down to the ones who are going to work, know exactly what you want about that relationship, and then pursue it in light of all of that research. And I know it's not as fun as designing your game and developing your game, because it'll be boring. It'll feel like you're wasting your time. But if you're spending years developing a game, you should spend a lot of time researching who you entrust it with.
One thing that could help on that, you can check the different stats. It's something really useful. You have SteamDB, you have now for console is more difficult because Nintendo's changed its rating. But if you can't have directly the data, you can also free to ask to the developers that already work with the publisher. It's probably one of the most relevant information that you can get on a publisher. Of course, you don't need to trust only one voice. You can contact 2 or 3 developers, and you can have a really fast idea of the publisher work on day-to-day, how they work with the developer about the project, but also about the cooperation, the marketing. If one situation will lead to direct stress situation for the developer, if 3 developers that work with a publisher are at conflict with him, you can have an idea that you could have problem when you have a small conflict, because you can have a conflict, but you have different way to resolve it. And if you have a publisher that use the contract for every conflict, you know that you will have probably problems with that publisher.
And I just want to add to what everyone said, that once you have done your research, which you should, and once you've had your crop and you found someone that you really like and that you really want to work with, and you have a good contract, both are winners and etc. That's also a time to assume that they want the good for your project, right? So when everything is signed and done, this is the time to just do everything that is best for the game, right? And build a relationship based on trust and not the other way around. Because once you have found that, right, when you have a good relationship between the publisher and the developer, that's when magic happens. And publishers will also go out of the way to do an even better job if that's the case, right? We love to see the devs that we love succeed, right? Because that, not only is it, that's why we work at all, that's why we get up in the morning, but it's also what's best for us as well. So have that in mind as well when the dust settles.
Yeah. So I'm gonna actually, I guess I do have one piece of advice that I think is interesting as well, and that is to actually start pitching the game earlier than you think you should start pitching the game. Just don't expect that you will be signing at that time, because that can actually give you a lot of information. Okay, so this game is actually not for this publisher because this, that, and the other. And there are ways that you can find publishers to pitch games to. For example, go to online events, or there are online events connected to EGX or Game Connection and all of that kind of stuff. It doesn't cost a lot. You can get input in front of a bunch of publishers, get their point of view on your concept or whatever you are in there, and you take that as an input to then further refine who you want to be working with, etc. So I guess that's one point. But then I want to come back to exactly what Sebastian said. In the end, we're one team, honestly. And that's true, I'm sure, for you guys as well as us. We have one interest in common. It's the same. It's the best of the game. Because if the game is successful, then everybody wins. And exactly as Sebastian and well, Sebastian and Tim and Johan, I'm sure it's the same. Like for us, like we literally, our mission is to create shining eyes at people's eyes, like shining eyes in people. Like that's our job. Like if people love the stuff that we're doing, that's success for everyone. And so we're all on the same team. Honestly, thank you guys so much. I think this has been super interesting. As I said, we should do it more often. I just hope everybody connects to TactiCon. Look at the great deals and demos and stuff that's coming up. And, you know, if you do have a game, obviously, I think you should, and it's a strategy game, you should definitely look into either one of us four here as a potential publisher, and reach out probably to all of us, because I know that these other three gentlemen here are very serious about what they're doing. I know that we are very serious about what we're doing. So in any case, you'll get a good reason why we won't work with you. I don't know. I think it feels to me that we touched a bunch of really interesting stuff, and I just want to go and enjoy TactiCon myself. So
yes. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.